Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead. Today we are discussing the topic, my garden failed, now what? This is something that I have seen and heard a lot of people talking about this year. They feel like their garden has completely failed. It has not been as successful as it has been in the past, or if this is their first year gardening, they feel like it just didn't turn out and they're really not sure that they want to continue gardening in the future. If that's where you're at, I want to go over 6 ideas that I think could be very helpful to you moving forward. The first thing is be realistic. Was the entire garden a failure, or were there some specific crops that just didn't do well this year while other things may have been more successful? I bring this idea up from personal experience. This year, our onions and potatoes did not do as well as they have in the past. And it could be easy to kind of get into this mindset of thinking that the whole garden just didn't do well this year. But that's not realistic, and that's not really where we're at. Those 2 crops didn't do as well as they have in the past, but we have a lot of other crops that are doing really well. The tomatoes look great and we're getting a bumper harvest off of those so far. Our squash and corn is looking great. So there are things that are doing quite well. It's just some items we're not doing as well. So the first thing you really want to do is be realistic about what's actually happening. Just because something didn't do well doesn't mean that the whole entire garden was a failure. The second idea is to preserve everything that you can when you have crops that are successful. So for us, this year, we're really going to make sure that we are preserving everything we can from the tomatoes, making sure that we are properly storing everything we can from the squash harvest, and we're just making sure that we are putting up everything that we can, because you don't know what the following year is going to hold. Last year was a great year for cucumbers. We had a ton of cucumbers we could use for making different kinds of pickles, and we put up everything that we could last year, and I'm so thankful that we did. We'll have plenty of cucumbers for fresh eating this year, and maybe some for our fermentation that we like to do in the refrigerator, but we're not going to be putting up jars and jars of pickles this year because there won't be as many as we had last year. Does that mean the crop failed? No, it just means there won't be as many to preserve. So you really want to look at what maybe was doing well in your garden and make sure that you're preserving everything you can from that crop this year, so that if something happens next year, you don't have as many, you're not going to be hurting for that particular item. Kind of going along with that, the third idea is to keep backups in your pantry. It's nice to continue to add to your pantry even when you are gardening, just so that you have some things on hand and it's not going to be a do or die, all or nothing kind of situation if you have some crops that aren't doing well. By keeping some things in the pantry as a backup, then you're going to at least be able to kind of fill in those gaps until you can find success with that crop, hopefully the next year. The fourth idea is to analyze what could have caused the failure. Sometimes we don't know. Gardening is a very interesting topic just because there's always more to learn. I don't think that you could ever fully arrive. Something new comes up on a regular basis. So I think this year a lot of people are feeling like the garden was not successful due to weather. Some people are having issues with droughts, some people had issues with a colder and wetter spring, and so that just affects how crops are growing. So take a look and see if you can analyze what might have caused the problems. Sometimes we just don't know. Sometimes just random things happen and we don't know, but you might be able to narrow it down and at least give yourself a starting point to problem solve for the next time that you plant that crop. Weather is not something that we can control. However, there might be some things that you can do to mitigate some of the extremes that we're seeing. For instance, do you need to look at better irrigation if you were having a drought? If you're having warmer than normal temperatures, do you need to look at shade cloth or something like that that could help to maybe shelter some of those plants? If you have cooler weather or wetter weather than you have in the past, do you maybe need to look at a greenhouse option or some type of hoop hut that might be able to help provide some warmth early in the season that could also give you a little bit of your plants a little bit of reprieve from the extra water that they were getting from all of the rain. So there are some things that you can kind of look at when it comes to the weather aspect of growing plants. You might need to look at seed germination. I've heard a lot of people talking this year about issues with seeds and germination. So trying to narrow down exactly what's going on with that. I have found for myself some issues with some of the store-bought seed that I have. So just taking a look and seeing, is the seed that you had a little bit too old? Is it possible that you did some direct sowing into the garden and maybe birds were getting the seeds, or some other kind of insect or animal might have been eating your brand new starts as soon as they were popping up? So kind of look and see. It might be a great option to do some experiments to see if you're getting a good germination rate on those seeds. It might also be a good idea to start your seeds and then transplant them out just to see if that affects how they start and how they're growing. I've noticed a big difference between things that I've tried starting and then in soil blocks or in small pots versus what I have direct sown. The items that I start in trays tend to do so much better than the items that are directly sown out into the garden, just because we've had a lot of pests that have kind of gotten the plants before they even have a chance to really establish and do well. So just take a look at some of those things. Another mistake that I have made in the past would be looking at what other people are planting in the same grow zone that I am, but not taking into consideration that they're in a different climate zone than I am. So I'll post a link in the description to a video that I did talking about climate zones versus grow zones. And I think this is something that could be really helpful if we take a look at that, especially as new gardeners. Sometimes you watch people on YouTube or you read books by people from other parts of the country, and their grow zone might be the same as yours, but the area is not the same. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we are grow zone 8, but our grow zone 8 is not the same as somebody who is in Mississippi grow zone 8. Their weather is much warmer, they have longer days. It just is not the same, even though we have the same grow zone. And I have been caught in that trap of looking at what someone else is doing and thinking, well, I could do that too, and then planting a crop and wondering why it didn't do well here. And the reason it didn't do well is because we're just not the same area, and it's not something that can grow here, even though it can grow in that area. We get so much more rain than a lot of other areas, and the heat just is not here. And so just taking a look at that. Did you plant something that you thought would do well, but then it didn't? We need things that are a little bit shorter growing season, and usually items that are cooler weather crops do much better here than they might somewhere else. So if you're getting your information from a lot of different sources and people who are growing in different areas, you just want to be mindful of that. There is so much that we can learn from everyone, no matter where they're at and no matter what their grow zone or what their area. We can learn from everyone, but just be sure to filter that information through the lens of where you're at and what might work best for your area. And that might involve some experimentation. Just don't get down on yourself if you try something and it doesn't work out and you thought that it might. So just be aware of that going forward. The other thing that kind of falls under this category is looking at the style of gardening. The same style of gardening doesn't work for everyone. For some people, raised beds work better. For some people, they prefer no-dig gardening. Some people prefer to till. You have to look at your weather, your area, your soil type, and decide what might work best for you. And if you're a brand new gardener, that might require some experimentation, and just allow yourself the opportunity to try some different things before you give up. If something didn't work well and you think maybe that style of gardening had something to do with it, then try something else. And again, this is where sometimes we get caught up into that comparison trap. Just because it works for someone else doesn't mean that it's going to be something that's going to work for you. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that that you don't have the potential to be successful or that you're not doing the best that you can. It just means you need to reevaluate and try something different, and that's perfectly fine. So kind of along with that, we want to learn from our challenges and from our successes. Look at what items were a challenge for you this year and look at the ways that you can improve upon that, and then look at the things that were successful. If you have some crops that are doing really well, think about what went well for those crops. What did you do? What kind of care did you give them? What variety of plant did you grow? And look at those things that were successful so that you can try to replicate that again next year. And last but not least, make sure that you don't give up. Just because something was not a success this year does not mean that you won't find success in the future. So start looking ahead to the next growing season. If you're in an area that can do fall gardening, by all means, get a fall garden going. Get that in the ground and try again with your fall garden. Even if you can't grow everything that you grew during your summer gardening season, try and experiment with some of the things that you can put in for fall. If you are not in a location where you can do some fall and winter gardening, start looking ahead to next summer. And as you're looking ahead to next summer, think about that analysis that you did. What were some of the successes? What were some things that maybe you want to change and try again for next year? And then start looking at how you could set yourself up for success. What are some things that you could do this fall that would help you to be in a great position going forward in the spring and summer of next year so that you can have a really successful garden? Is it a matter of getting some supplies? Maybe you need that irrigation system to look different, and so you need to purchase some supplies so that you can go ahead and put that irrigation system together, or you have on hand what you need to do that. Or maybe if you want to try using some shade cloth and you've never done that before, maybe you want to get some on hand so that you have that for next season and you're not scrambling when you get that burst of warm weather and you need some shade cloth to kind of help some of those plants along that you're trying to get started. If you're thinking about putting in a greenhouse, while you might not want to put the plastic on it right now, you could start looking at what your frame is going to look like for next year. How could you build that? Are you going to buy something pre-made? What might you want to do? What kind of space do you have? Those are all things that you can work on this fall to set yourself up for success for next year. Gardening is something that you're always going to be learning and growing, and I feel like every year something changes. Just when you think, oh, I think I've mastered that particular crop, something changes. Maybe, like I said, the weather's different. We don't have any control over that. Or you find a new insect that you've never seen before shows up on the scene and you have to deal with that. So we're always learning and growing. Make sure that you're not giving up and that you are continuing to analyze and move forward. I hope today's video was helpful to you. If it was, don't forget to like, share this out with a friend who maybe needs a little bit of encouragement if their gardening season was not as successful as they wanted it to be. And we would love to have you join us here at Blooming Wildwood Homestead and become part of our community, where every week I give you videos on gardening, food preservation, and ways that you can use things from your pantry. I can't wait to see you back here next time. Until then, bye everyone.